Hello one and all, welcome back to ArcheAge Inspiration. My name is Cilantro. Today's rolls are 4, 6, and 9. So let's see what we get. Looks like that is Sorcery, Witchcraft, and Shadow Play. Okay. This is Daggerspell. One of the most popular bids out there. Alright, let's take a look. Well, I've been struggling for a while about Daggerspell. Now, I would just like to get out of the way that Daggerspell is one of the most popular builds out there. It's quite thoroughly explored. There are a ton of different options for the builds, and I feel like that's kind of not really the point of my inspiration series. I think I would rather try to just do sort of a info dump, I guess, about what all Daggerspell is and why it's good, and some options that are almost never taken and why those options are almost never taken. So rather than actually spending a bunch of money respecking a million times, I'm just going to kind of mouse over everything here and sort of go over the general idea behind the Daggerspell. So between Earthen Grip, Enervate, Bubble Trap, Banshee Wail, Focal Concussion, really just the whole crowd control package from Witchcraft, they have the typical trappings of what you could expect from anybody using Witchcraft. High crowd control. In addition, they're usually very point heavy into sorcery, usually getting any combination of Flame Bolt, Freezing Earth, Chain Lightning and Arc Lightning, Insulating Lens, Magic Circle for buffs, sometimes even Frigid Tracks, Meteor Strike, Freezing Arrow, and all these are very high damage spells. In addition, Shadow Play brings, for some builds, Overwhelm and Shadow Smite. Shadow Smite comboing very well with Purge, allowing you to ensure 4 seconds of Shackle and Silence, which is very powerful. Stalker's Mark boosting your overall damage. Shadow Step for extra maneuverability. Stealth for its general usage in World PvP and all that kind of stuff. One of the interesting things that I think makes Daggerspell so powerful is that it doesn't rely much on passives. It's got a lot of high impact spells that it can just fire off in rapid succession. I mean, you're using some of the most powerful spells in the game over and over and over again in a very, very quick succession. And this is all supplemented by Shadow Play and really shoring up a lot of the weaknesses that Sorcery and Witchcraft would otherwise have, which is namely mobility for the most part. Even just drop back and Shadow Step alone, which I've seen some Daggerspells use. Just drop back, just Shadow Step from Shadow Play makes a world of difference in helping to deliver this package right here of Witchcraft and Sorcery. Not to mention, of course, the World PvP ramifications of Stealth, and again, if you do wish to go for it, Overwhelm and Shadow Smite. But it's the fact that you don't need a lot of passives to make this build work that really makes it shine. Usually Augment Witchcraft is taken because it's just so powerful, increasing your CC duration, removing Earthen Grip's cast time, even reducing the cast time for Insidious Whisper if you so desire it. An ability that I think is a little underrated by a number of Daggerspell builds. I will link a few Daggerspell builds down in the info section of this video just for completion's sake. And I'm kind of disappointed in myself that I couldn't really find anything to any way to innovate in this spec, but I guess it just goes to show how well how well it's endured the test of time over the course of all the play. That being said, I still want to go over a few abilities and why I think they deserve a spot in the Daggerspell suite. So I've taken an array of various abilities that some Daggerspells will take and some that they will never take, and just as I mentioned a second ago, I'd like to explain why some of these abilities are never taken. We're going to start off with Witchcraft. First of all, Play Dead. Play Dead is, I don't want to say useless, because it's got some uses, for sure. One of the biggest examples of use that I can think of for it, which probably still not worth actually taking it, but one of the biggest reasons you might want to take it is, well, first of all, for leveling. It does give you some life and mana back, which is, mana regen and efficiency are very difficult to deal with when leveling. The other thing is that it does allow you to shed all aggro from all monsters that have attacked you. So if you're in a PvP situation in a mob-populated area, for example, Hasla, and you have mobs on you, if you do have Play Dead, you can use it, and it'll get all the mobs off of you immediately. They will likely go attack one of your friends or one of your enemies, but they won't be attacking you. And that's sort of the important part. Of course, the largest drawback for one is that it's got a 3-minute cooldown. So, and it's of relatively simple and marginal use. So I understand why people don't take it, and I do not really advocate taking it. But the point of this video is to show off things that Daggerspell doesn't usually take. I've seen some Daggerspells not take Dahuta's Breath, and in my mind that kind of seems like a big mistake. Dahuta's Breath is just really powerful. It's relatively low mana cost for its damage, 433 for a good chunk of damage, dealing a ton more on electric shock targets, which are going to have electric shock distributed in almost any situation where you really want to do a bunch of burst anyway. You're likely going to be firing off arc lightning and chain lightning, both of which will inflict electric shock, and Dahuda's Breath, of course, giving in a large amount of damage. One of the things about Dahuda's Breath that I don't think people really appreciate as much is that it is a sort of hard CC. It's really kind of one of the few that can actually not ever be countered. So, for example, if somebody's channeling a really nasty spell, I believe the only thing that can prevent you from having Dahuda's Breath affect you is the defense ability that actually prevents knockbacks. I do believe that Dahuda's Breath will not interrupt your spells in that case, but not everybody has defense, and if they do, there's other ways to get around them, but if they don't, Dahuda's Breath works as a nice little attack that does a good amount of damage and as well knocks back. In fact, it even inflicts a debuff for about 1 second that really, I think, kind of makes it show that it is in fact doing a hard CC. It's not just a visual knockback. There's actual crowd control involved there. It will interrupt spells. It'll of course throw people out of position. And in addition, in a very practical sense, there's often going to be two people around. This thing has a much larger cone than you would think. It'll take a lot of practice to really kind of get exactly how far you can attack with it. But it's got a pretty large, it's essentially a cone. And if you get used to using it and practice with it, you'll find it to be quite powerful. Not to mention on water, if you're out in the ocean. It's one of the easiest ways to knock people off their boat, which is always very powerful. So I would like to be an advocate for Dahuda's Breath. Some of you guys are probably thinking, oh my god, who doesn't take Dahuda's Breath? But that's what I think too, and yet I've seen people not use it. Kind of perplexing. Insidious Whisper is one of those tough ones. When you do have the cast time reduction from Augment Witchcraft, it's better, which most dagger spells will get anyway. I don't think it's so much of a matter of people not thinking it's great, so much as people just not thinking it really makes the cut, which I can understand. It is certainly very powerful, if anything, just for the fact that you can cast it at a 20-meter range. One of the things about the hard cast crowd control that the Daggerspell, and really most of the game has, is that some of the longer duration crowd control, and yes, I would consider 4.5 seconds or so to be long duration, is only really up close. Bubble Trap does have a 20-meter range as well, but things like Lassitude has a 10-meter range. Banshee Whale has a 5-meter range. Focal Concussion, 8-meter range. Leech from Oromancy has a, I think, 4 or 5-meter range. It's very short range. So for a hard CC, even with a cast time at range, I think Insidious Whisper is pretty underrated. So just for completionist sake, I want to show you one of the most common initiation methods that most dagger spells will use. There's always different patterns, so this isn't the ultimate one, but it's just one that is available. So you usually start off with Banshee Whale into Lassitude, Fear being usually a pretty hard CC element, the Lassitude of course being a long duration sleep. You then cast a Meteor Strike, usually with your Circle for extra damage of course. Follow up with a Bubble. You can also, if you wish, try to sneak in the Chain Lightning right after the bubble. The choice is yours. Once they're bubbled quite up there far in the air, you can follow up with Chain Lightning, maybe using your Arc Lightning as well. Once they fall, you can Dahuda's Breath and sort of feel out the battle from there. Certainly one of the options, but there's one that I just kind of found a little bit ago that has a little bit of nice synergy to it that may work better in some situations, and so I'd like to show you that right now. So just like before, we're going to use the same initiation. 2 abilities, which gives us a pretty hard CC. We're going to start casting a Meteor Strike. And then we're immediately going to shoot a Enervate as soon as the Meteor Strike goes. And then we're going to follow up with an Insidious Whisper. It's going to give us a good amount of damage. We can also follow up with Mud Hand if we need. Doing it a little faster probably would have made it easier because it would have actually comboed. And this allows us to get some pretty good distance. Once you've gotten your distance, you can use Frigid Tracks to make things a little bit easier in terms of avoiding your enemy. And then you can follow up with whatever else you wish. Fireball into Bubble Trap, whatever you wish after this point. So for a few things that I think no dagger spell should really take, and I'm the first to admit that there's not necessarily always an optimal build, but there's some abilities that just don't really fit within this suite that I think if you're even trying to invest in them, then you're kind of deviating from what witchcrafts and sorcery really bring. Those are a few of the shadow play abilities. For one, Toxic Shot. not only is it not really going to be well geared for you, but the damage over time can actually be a hindrance, considering a lot of your crowd control elements are going to be, you know, broken if anything takes any damage during the duration of a toxic shot. Pin down and while up, both of these are kind of low damage melee attacks that don't really inflict any status ailments, and all they do is just pure damage. They do give you Bloodthirst, but Bloodthirst isn't really that useful for you. So I would avoid these in almost every build, actually, but definitely for Daggerspell. Likewise, Rapid Strike. I've advocated this ability's use in some other specs, and I do firmly stand by my recommendations, but you just don't have room for it. There's too many high-value single abilities in the rest of the tree that you would really want to take, and trying to weave in your Rapid Strike attacks in a build that generally doesn't want to be that close is, I don't know, just not worth it. Lastly, we have Searing Rain, an ability that's almost never used, even in AoE grinding situations. It's just not really that great. The damage is moderate, but the fact that you have to sit here and channel it, and it doesn't really guarantee hits in any specific direction, kind of makes it not worth it. You can try it out if you really want to for AoE stuff, but I think if you're going to go for a channeled finish or Summon Wraith from Cultism is better. One of the other things that makes Daggerspell so strong is its just preponderance of combinations. According to ArcheBase, the Daggerspell has 83 spell combos between all of its abilities, potentially. That is insane. Not to mention that most of the damage that really comes from Daggerspell and why it's got such a high damage output is because of all of the different combinations that actually do extra damage when you do them. So Chain Lightning, if the target's shocked, you get more damage from Arc Lightning. Dahuda's Breath gets more damage from electric shock targets. Even stuff like Flame Barrier, more damage if the target is chilled. More damage from burning targets. More damage on sleeping targets, in fact. Meteor Strike, more damage on chilled targets. Just damage, damage, damage all over the place. Even with mediocre gear, Daggerspell, with all of its combinations, especially when augmented by the Shadow Play tree, just really makes this one of the highest burst damage classes in the game. There are a few combos you may not be aware of. For example, Enervate will actually increase the duration of Overwhelm for the duration of trip and stun. 30%, quite a large difference, can make make or break some sort of a survival situation. And if you've not seen it before, I can show you this in this video as well. I've discovered a really interesting interaction that I think not many people really know about, which is the Deep Freeze. I mean, obviously it's listed there, but I don't see too many people use it, mostly because it's pretty hard to use. But Freezing Earth has a chance to inflict the little icicle, snowflake debuff, which I believe is called Chilled. You can also inflict it with the Frigid Tracks ability, and of course Freezing Arrow itself inflicts it. And if you're hit with with this debuff, and then you're also hit with Freezing Arrow, something interesting happens. Let's see if I can get it to work here. I'm going to cast Frigid Tracks, which also makes our Freezing Arrow instant cast. As soon as we see that debuff go, we throw, and look at that, a 30-second deep freeze. Of course, it's only like 15 seconds in PvP, but pretty devastating. In addition, 2 people casting Freezing Arrows against the same target will inflict this debuff with almost 100% success rate. So just be aware that this is something that will potentially exist within your repertoire. You do have a chance to inflict it when you activate Freezing Earth. Unfortunately, it's only a chance to inflict it, so you have to be watching for it. In fact, there, I got it. Ice Shard, bam, and we get another deep freeze. So if you are playing this build, consider possibly trying to work in Frigid Tracks into your build and use it for the instant cast Freezing Arrows if you have an opportunity. There are a number of times when your targets will be slept or otherwise hard CC that you should be able to get Frigid Tracks off, and really there's no reason not to have it up on you during PvP, because even if you're just backpedaling, it'll make anything that approaches you, if anybody walks into it, you can immediately just follow up essentially with Freezing Arrow and get a very long duration sleep. So one last thing to finish up this video, and it's something that I've seen usable in many different MMOs. For example, in WoW, there's some neat tricks you can use with this concept, but the idea is that every time you activate an instant cast spell, it sort of comes at the beginning of a global cooldown. And if you have a spell that has a cast time, then it tends to end up more at the end of a global cooldown, meaning that if you have a spell that occurs at the beginning of the global cooldown, you can sort of combo these in ways that otherwise wouldn't be possible. And so just as an example here, I'm going to go ahead and run up to this mutated flesh golem. I'm going to cast Innervate, and then I'm going to use the cast time version of Earthen Grip and follow it up with a Chain Lightning. So watch what happens. Innervate. I'm going to Earthen Grip and immediately cast Chain Lightning. Now notice that I did get the Electric Shock off, and the target is actually still afflicted by the Earthen Grip. What can happen, unfortunately, sometimes is if you use the instant cast Earthen Grip, the Earthen Grip may have traveled to the target before the Chain Lightning will hit, meaning that the Chain Lightning will subsequently break the Earthen Grip. And just to show this in action, I'm going to toss an Innervate, I'm going to toss a Mud Hand, and immediately going to Electric Shock afterwards, and look, the Mud Hand was broken. The Electric Shock, of course, hit and did a good amount of damage, but otherwise I was unable to do the same trick because I did not have a cast time. So just because an ability has a cast time or doesn't necessarily mean that it's a direct improvement. Something you have to be very careful of. In addition, one thing I'll show off when I get back here as my little buddy Mutated Flesh Golem runs back is that if you do choose not to take the Augment Witchcraft ability, which it is sort of an option, this does increase the duration of your CC elements. What I would do instead to counteract the lower duration of all your abilities is to lower your cooldowns. So if you do choose not to get Augment Witchcraft so you can do some Earthen Grip shenanigans, you might want to consider taking Enshroud instead so that your abilities will actually come up off of cooldown more quickly. But the other thing I wanted to show you, and most Dagger spells are aware of this, is that when you use Dropback, you no longer have to have a cast time for your next Flame Bolt or Earthen Grip. Sunder Earth is a Battle Rage skill, of course, but the cast time is completely eliminated for your next one of these abilities. So if you do want to have an instant cast, even though you don't have it spec'd, you can still do it by dropping back first and then immediately getting a Earthen Grip afterwards. And of course, likewise with Frigid Tracks, removing the cast time for Freezing Arrow, that opens up some other options. Of course, it allows you to be more mobile when you're using Freezing Arrow, which is always good, as it does have a reasonably long cast time without any buffs on. But the fact that you can make it instant cast can also open up some other combos where you use something that does have a cast time and then immediately follow up with Freezing Arrow. Off the top of my head, I don't really have a ton of examples for this, but when you're looking at a class that's been so well examined like Daggerspell, it's hard to really find anywhere else to innovate. But hopefully some of this was at least a little enlightening for you, some of the other combinations that may crop up, and some of the reasons that you may want to take some abilities, or at least test some abilities that you may have otherwise overlooked for Daggerspell. That's all I had to say. Thanks for watching ArcheAge Inspiration for Daggerspell. Thank you for liking and sharing and subscribing, and I will see you next time.